Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. So it's been a while since I've given you guys a reading update because I didn't have much to update you on because all of April was consumed by Sarah J. Maas. I reread her entire backlist, and there's gonna be a part two of my manic unhinged theories coming. I have to organize my thoughts. Y'all should see my notes app. It's ridiculous. Like, I am in so deep to mythology and lore and mythos and name origins. Like, I am so far into this rabbit hole, it's not even funny. So we're working on that. I took a break during Crescent City because I don't love the series, and that's where a lot of the breadcrumbs are lying. So I want to be able to like dedicate time to that. So I did get back into reading, and I don't do full wrap-ups on my channel anymore just because of time's sake and rambling sake, but I do tend to talk about like the best books that I've read recently, but it hasn't been that many, so this might turn into ultimately a wrap up from SJM till now. So we're gonna skip over all of the Maas stuff and we'll jump right into the books that I've read since then. Let's pull up some Goodreads and scroll back to, oh, there's Silver Flames. Okay, so we're gonna start on a negative note. Are y'all ready? I don't really do rants on my channel. This might be close though. So I read Of Light and Darkness by Shane Layton. This, I think one of you guys sent this to me. I had this on my wish list because I saw it show up at some point in time in my life, as, you know, that's how you get recommendations. And it was pitched kind of as like a modern romance fairy tale retelling, and I was like, sign me up. Those are my favorite words. I didn't like it at all. So it feels very old fairy tale-ish, like just the language and the writing style is very like fairy tale-esque, but like dry, not like whimsical and fun, like boring, dry literature that I feel like you would be told as a like sickly Victorian child. And it's like a vampire, all kinds of supernatural creature type of world, so it's not a specific fairy tale that it's retelling. But it basically follows a girl who has been raised by this vampire. She's kind of taken in as a baby and is raised through her childhood to just kind of be like his apprentice slash ward type of character. She is the person who goes out during the day and lures victims back for him to drink from at night. And so it just kind of started as that. And I was like, okay, interesting. So it's like a father-daughter dynamic, and you kind of meet some of the characters in town, like in the village, and they're all different types. It's like Halloween Town-esque. It's all very like bizarre types of like warlocks and shifter type creatures. And then the book slowly develops as a romance between her and her vampire, like daddy-o person. Which is fine because, like, that tends to be how vampire stories are. There's always going to be a big ol' age gap because, you know, immortal and human. But it started at an icky place. It started as her, as like a 17 or 18-year-old, and she's like becoming a woman and recognizing what these feelings are, as if you don't know what hormones are through your entire teenage years. But it also kind of flashes back to her as a child, and he dresses her up like a doll, and he like wants her to have this very specific image of like what a proper young lady looks like. It is so groomy and disgusting, that like there was nothing romantic about it other than she's just like, all of a sudden he went from being my caretaker to this sexy figure that I can't resist. And there was nothing about him that was appealing to me as a reader. So I gave this like 1 star. I just didn't like it. They end up going on like this adventure, like the council of other supernatural beings just wants to take vampires out because they think they're like parasites on the community. So they're being hunted, so they go on the run with each other, and the only way they can find safety is if he like whores her out to this like coven of vampires in hiding and lets her be their food source. And he's just like, I promise, it's okay. I'm like, it's not it was weird. So it had this weird, like, old, creepy fairy tale language with just old and creepy story stuff also. So I was not a fan. Okay, that was enough rambling about a not-so-great book. Let's get to some better stuff. I'm gonna bounce around a lot with genres in this wrap-up. So I bounced into my favorite nonfiction zone, that is animal husbandry and farming and science and whatnot, and I read Our Wild Farming Life, Adventures on a Scottish Highland Croft, by Lynn Castles. And this follows a couple who ends up basically just like upending their life and buying a piece of land in the Scottish Highlands and trying to basically like bring it back to the land and like learn how to farm from scratch and learn how to farm in like old ancient ways. And them just learning how to fit in with the community and going through the trials and tribulations of learning what farming entails and all of the research and work that goes into it. I thoroughly enjoyed it. One, because of the accents. I listened to it as an audiobook. Thoroughly enjoyed the Scottish accents. And it was just great. It was just a really wholesome, eye-opening, like thought-provoking book about getting into farming in like the modern world, but also trying to still retain old farming techniques that have worked throughout the years. So I thoroughly enjoyed it. That's my little niche part of nonfiction that probably only I would enjoy, but I thoroughly enjoyed it. Ooh, okay, jumping back into romance. I finally read one of the trendy books that everybody's been talking about for the past couple months that is a very, very, very dark romance, and that is Still Beating by Jennifer Hartman. So this is a book that I know a lot of people have read, and people have very mixed opinions about it. But it's probably one of the darkest romances that I've read just based on subject matter. So when I tell you check trigger warnings, check trigger warnings. This kind of has all of the above when it comes to sexual abuse and rape, and everything in between. And it basically is just a lot of trauma and a lot of trauma bonding and trauma healing. So this book is going to... How do I phrase this without it coming off as really crass? This book is going to appeal to people who are really deep into like true crime stuff, but also like reading romance, and pushing boundaries. So this tells a story about a girl and her sister's boyfriend. So that is an element that happens. Or fiance, I believe they're actually engaged. They get kidnapped by a crazy person, who holds them hostage in his basement and does horrible stuff to them, makes them do horrible stuff to each other. And that's like the whole first half of the book is on page horrific stuff happening. So it follows them as they are basically clinging to each other in this situation. And then obviously like the rest of the book is after, I mean, I guess kind of spoilers, but kind of, you know where it's going, after they have escaped the situation and they're both trying to process what happened to them, and they are the only people who can relate to what the other one went through. So it's messy and it's angsty, and also it's just incredibly dark and triggering. So obviously take all of those trigger warnings very seriously. I ultimately really, really liked it, but it definitely was hard to read at times. As somebody who reads a lot of very disturbing stuff, it was very interesting to see how the romance progressed in an unhealthy way, but also in a healthy way. Like, it's not just like jumping from one thing to another. It's a long book, so you see a long course of healing for both characters. So I liked it. Definitely go into it very wary of all of those warnings. So, okay, I was in kind of like a darker, more taboo mood for a bit. So I also picked this book up because this is the book that we read for my book club. I'm gonna have a hot take here. I hated this book. I'm pretty sure I'm like the only person who did not like this book. This was my first Michaelia Meltzer book, and I know she writes very kind of hard and emotional things into her books. I felt like it was weak writing. Eek. So this is an age gap romance between an 18-year-old girl, which is fine, as long as we're over the age of consent and a consenting adult, so those are my requirements, of an 18-year-old girl and her 31-year-old neighbor, who is a single dad, who is just kind of like a grumpy person. So it's a grump and sunshine trope, and it's an age gap trope, and it's like a dark past type of trope. So I just felt like all of the things that were written into this book were just written in as plot devices to create... I feel like there's a lot of telling and not showing in this book, I guess is how I'm trying to phrase things. So our heroine's name is Salem in this book, and she has dealt with some abuse in her past, which I feel like was written in just to try and age her up, but it didn't ultimately actually age her up. I felt like it was just written in as something to break the ice between these two characters as it was revealed to the hero in this book. And I don't know, I just felt like it was... Normally when the younger character in an age gap romance has gone through a lot in their past, it tends to mature them quickly, and that's why the age gap happens. To me, I still felt like Salem was a very teenager-y teenager, just because it was told only from her perspective, and I think I prefer age gap romances to be slower burn, and I also want to see both sides hesitating. I want to see the tension, and I want to see both sides resisting the tension. And this was only told from her perspective, and she just felt very, very young to me, which made it seem kind of ickier to me, because I felt like Thayer, who is our hero, was just like instantly attracted to her, and there was none of that hesitation that should have been there, having been such a big age gap with a teenager. And she acted like a teenager. I feel like that was the main difference, and the abuse in her past potentially could have aged her up and matured her faster than she should have aged, and instead it just sat like a trauma that just kind of like opened up a bond between them, but it wasn't even done well. It has all of the tropes that I like in books. It has like a one bad trope. It has like a nightmare trope. It has, I like age gap tropes. I like neighbors. I like Grump and Sunshine. But for some reason, it just didn't work for me. It didn't feel groomy. It didn't feel like gross. But I didn't really like that Thayer didn't really have any hesitation into jumping into a relationship with her. There was not much discussion about the age gap, which I feel like is kind of a crucial part of an age gap romance. It was just like an instantly, okay, I'm attracted to you, I'm attracted to you too, let's do this sort of thing. So I think I'm very, very picky about age gap romances because a lot of people loved this book, and I think I'm just very particular about what I look for. This also does have a big, horrible ending that has a lot of triggering stuff in it that I'm not going to spoil in this video, but if you're very sensitive to specific things, look up reviews of this book. It would be a huge spoiler for this book if I told you what the trigger warning is, so if you're nervous about it, look it up, see if it's something you can handle. It was rough, gonna be honest. It was a pretty emotional ending to this book. I don't think I'm even gonna read the second book, though. I know. I wasn't a big fan. Okay, I ended up listening to an audio arc that I got from Mech LA a very long time ago and I forgot to review, and it was for The Billionaire, by Marnie Mann, which is the second book in the Dalton Brothers series. I never read a Marnie Mann book, and I know a lot of people say that she's basically just like a queen of smut, and I'm like, that is Sierra Simone to me. So this book, if you want to lean more towards the erotica end of the romance spectrum, Marnie Mann is going to be an author for you because she just she puts like dick on page one, you know? She's one of those authors that just kind of like tosses you in bed with the characters from the get-go. Which sometimes you need that. Sometimes you just need all spice and no plot. I think I prefer a little bit of plot. So this follows a girl who ends up hooking up with a guy while she's on vacation with her girlfriends in Vegas, and it's basically just like instant lust between them, and they can't keep their hands off each other. They end up spending the entire vacation together, and turns out he's a billionaire who owns like a big real estate law firm type of company thing, and he ends up like flying to Miami where she lives to visit her all the time, and it's just their kind of growing relationship and them just boning on every single page. So if you're looking for a spicy good time, Marnie Mann might be an author for you. I kind of rolled my eyes at most of it. Like, it was enjoyable. It wasn't the worst thing I've ever read, but it was not great. So it was probably like a 2 or 3 star book for me. It was okay. I didn't even read book 1 of the series. I don't think you really needed to, because I think it just follows these brothers and these friends who like work together, who are just like these rich alpha hole type characters. So take that as you will. And then I jumped back into the dark romance genre, and I finally read Darling Venom by Parker S. Huntington. This is a book that I've also seen going around at the kind of the end of last year. I saw a lot of people reading it. So this is another heavy, angsty, dark romance. So this follows our heroine, who is best friends through all of high school with this guy named Kellen, and they have this deal where like every Valentine's Day they meet on a rooftop because both of them are suicidal, and it's kind of both of them holding each other accountable to stay alive. And ultimately this book is a romance much, much later in life with our heroine that we met at the beginning of this book as a teenager. We see her later in life, and it is a book about healing that kind of is advertised as a romance, but it does read more kind of like fiction because I feel like the romance wasn't exactly the driving plot. The healing was the driving plot. But it's a romance between her and that guy's older brother, who is kind of a douche. And it has a scene in it that I have never read in a romance, nor did I ever think I would read in a romance, that deals with a gynecologist that both gave me the ick and also was just like, huh, that was different. That was something that I've never seen and I'm not sure how I feel about it. So that was a scene. So I read that. I ultimately ended up really liking it by the end. It just was a really good book as a whole. I don't think it was the best romance. I don't think it was necessarily the healthiest romance, but I enjoyed it as a book. So I probably gave it like 3.5 to 4 stars. And then, okay, the last book that I've completed, and then I'm going to talk to you about what I'm currently reading, which are the 2 books that I want to talk to you about the most. So I read Funny Farm. This is a memoir style type of nonfiction book about a girl's history in her past with her mom, just being like kind of poor in the Pine Hills of New Jersey, and her ultimately running a really big nonprofit farm animal rescue, which has been like a kick that I've been on recently for some reason. Like I read the Scottish Highland one, I read this one, I watched all of Saved by the Barn on Animal Planet. I've been deep into like the farm rescue stories recently for whatever reason. So this was just a really funny story where like every other chapter was a back and forth between her growing up with her family and her mom and escaping abuse and taking in neglected animals and dealing with the poverty line, and then it would flash forward to like a funny modern story about one of the animals that she took in. So it was enjoyable. It wasn't like the most memorable memoir that I've ever read. Was that redundant? Probably. But I probably gave it like 3 stars-ish. So it was good. Okay, I want to talk about the books that I'm currently reading. You ready? So a physical book that I'm reading, well, Kindle at least, ARC, I'm reading Babble by R.F. Kuang. I know you guys already know this. I was going to film a reading vlog for it, but 1, it's taking me a really long time to get through it. But 2, I don't know how to film a reading vlog for an arc that isn't out for a really long time, because all I'm going to want to do is spoil what's happening in the book, but I can't tell you anything that's happening in the book. So it's just going to be a lot of just kind of like me freaking out and then footage of me just reading, you know? So instead, I'm just going to kind of talk about it periodically as I go. So I'm about 60% of the way into it right now, and it's a lot. It's very dense. It's very intelligent. It's very like academic, and I can basically read 2 to 3 chapters at a time before I kind of have to put it down and like process what I'm reading, because it requires all of my brain strength to process what I'm reading for some reason. It's just written very academically, and it puts you back in the mindset of like sitting in a college lecture and having your mind like opened up to thought-provoking concepts. So it's historical London. It takes place in like the late 1800s at Oxford, in this fictionalized branch of Oxford called Babble, which is where essentially like linguistics is taught, and it takes in kids from all over the world, essentially. Very small amount. Our main cast is 4 characters, and they're the current year in the Babble branch of Oxford. And basically they have been taught their entire lives the ins and outs of languages, and they are brought into this college to learn more about languages and the origins of different languages and how different languages relate to each other. But it's ultimately a story about racism and injustice in old school Ivy League settings. So it's very infuriating to read. So not only is it very thought-provoking and intellectual, it's also enraging, just because there's a lot of just offhanded, extremely racist sentences that are just uttered from professor to student or from student to student that are just kind of tossed in to steadily like build this rage in you. And I'm reaching the point where it's starting to like come to a head, and it's a lot. So I read about 2 to 3 chapters at a time before I put it down for a day or 2, and then I come back to it. And it's so good. It doesn't make you feel dumb. It's dense and it's smart, but like it's accessible. It's just a lot. So I'm loving it, but it's definitely not the easiest thing to just pick up and breeze right through. So I'm at like 60% of that. I'm hoping to finish that within the next like week or 2 so that I can just like take a breather and read some smut for a while on my Kindle. So I'm reading that, and then I'm listening to an audio arc from NetGalley of Ordinary Monsters by J.M. Miro. This is Tor's big release of the year, I believe. And this is historical fantasy. And it was pitched as The Umbrella Academy meets Peaky Blinders. And I said, say no more. It's very much Umbrella Academy, X-Men, supernatural power type of situation in the like nitty-gritty, dirty streets of London. And it's so good. I didn't really know that this is what I was in the mood for until I was reading it. It was one of those light bulb moments where as I was listening to it, I was like, this is exactly what my brain wants right now. You know, those moments, they're so good. So I'm listening to that, and it's basically following two characters who are the Talents, and this is what are basically the orphans that have these powerful gifts of some sort. And they're bizarre powers. They're not like your average, like, oh, I can fly, I can like walk through walls sort of things. It's like they can control dust. But the cause of having that power is creating this monstrous creature out of somebody who is close to you, sort of. It's a lot, but it all makes sense when you're reading it. So it's following these two orphan children as they're being picked up by these detectives / agents of the school, and bringing them back to the school to basically help them hone their gifts. So it has like that X-Men Academy vibe, but it also just has like the setting, like the atmosphere is so vivid. It's just dirty, smoky, nighttime, wet streets of London feels, but it also takes place partly in America where they're recruiting two of the kids, and there's a circus setting. One of the kids ends up in a traveling circus, and I didn't even know that was in the book, and I said, oh, this is extremely for me. So I am loving it. I'm actually probably about 60% of the way through that one too, so I'm at the same point of both books, and both of them are historical fantasies, which is interesting, because I didn't know that I wanted that, and yet somehow those are the two books that I'm the most into this year. So I have a feeling both of those books are going to make my top list of the entire year. So if you're going to take anything away from this video, read these two books. That was 4. Read these two books. Babble and Ordinary Monsters. Cool? Okay, I've been rambling for way too long. Hope you guys enjoyed a new reading update, because it's been a while since I've talked about what I'm reading. So there you go. That's what I'm reading. And I will see you guys in my next video.